Hello everyone and welcome back to the Ryan Retro channel. Retroid now has 3 devices under $250, with less than $50 separating all 3 of them, and they all look really similar. So today we're going to look at all of them, compare them, and think which one is right for you, which one should you buy, and should you actually buy any of them, because there is a 4th option which might be better than any of these for you. This is the Retroid Pocket 5. It released just over 1 year ago. I have more than 80 videos of this on my channel, so there is a wealth of information out there about it. I also have thousands of compatibility reports of this on my website, ryanretro.com, and they're also available on emuready.com as well. It is a very capable device, capable of playing games up to PlayStation 2 and GameCube without really any issues. And it's even capable of playing light Switch and PC games as well. Coming in at $199, if your hard cut-off budget line is $200, this is still a great option. And there are quite a lot of these popping up used now as people upgrade to the newer models, which we have on the table here. First of all is the Retroid Pocket G2, which uses the exact same chassis as the Retroid Pocket 5, just with an improved chip inside, giving it more power to play more demanding games. The chip inside is very similar to that of the Retroid Pocket 6. So these two, the Retroid Pocket G2 and the Retroid Pocket 6, just like the Retroid Pocket 5, can play everything up to the PS2 and GameCube, but they're going to also be able to play more Switch and PC games as well. There are still systems that have issues like PS Vita, PS3, Wii U, Xbox. These are just systems that are quite immature and not developed yet. So we need to wait for the software to improve so this hardware can catch up. But when it comes to the power of the chipsets, these are very similar. So let's now take a look at the specifications of all 3 of these devices and see how they stack up on paper. So here we have the specs and pricing for the 3 devices on the table: the Retroid Pocket 5, the Retroid Pocket G2, and the Retroid Pocket 6. When it comes to the chipset, the Retroid Pocket 5 has the slightly older Snapdragon 865. The Retroid Pocket G2 has the G2 Gen 2 processor, which is the newest of the bunch, and the Retroid Pocket 6 has the well-known and well-regarded Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. These 2 chips are very similar, so I would say they're on a pretty even footing. When it comes to GPU, once again, these are usually included alongside the chip, so it will be no surprise that these are also the best 2 available. But I would give a slight edge to the Retroid Pocket 6 chip because it's just so well known, and there are so many spreadsheets, documents, and compatibility reports all over the internet for this chip. So if you're newer to emulation and you want to just be told what settings to use and get up and running quickly, the well-known and well-used chip in the Retroid Pocket 6 is going to be more simple for you. It's the same chip used in the Odin 2, the Odin 2 Portal, the Odin 2 Mini, the AYN Thor. It's a chip that's just all over the place, so there's a lot of information about it. This chip in the Retroid Pocket G2 is unique to the Retroid Pocket G2, so you're relying only on people who have used this specific device to help you out. So while on paper these are very similar, I would give a slight edge to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 just because we know it really well. When it comes to RAM, the Retroid Pocket 5 has 8GB of LPDDR4X RAM. The Retroid Pocket G2 and the Retroid Pocket 6 have the newer LPDDR5X RAM. So once again, that should be a slight edge to those. When it comes to the screen refresh rate, the Retroid Pocket 5 and the Retroid Pocket G2 have the exact same 1080p 60Hz panel. The Retroid Pocket 6 has a 1080p 120Hz panel, which is probably the biggest upgrade the Retroid Pocket 6 has over the competition. If you've gone from using a 60Hz monitor to a 144Hz monitor, or even a 60Hz phone to a 90Hz phone, you know how much smoother everything is. And it's not just when playing games that support 120Hz, it's the overall using the device, swiping around between apps, everything is just so fluid and feels nicer. The video output through USB-C has also been upgraded with the Retroid Pocket 6 to a 4K 60Hz output. The Retroid Pocket 5 did initially support 4K when it first released, but was only able to support 30Hz. Lots of people complained that the output was laggy, so Retroid, during an update, locked it down to only 1080p 60Hz to ensure that it was smooth, but you couldn't get 4K anymore. The Retroid Pocket G2 seems to have that exact same output as the Retroid Pocket 5, given that it shares the same hardware, so once again you're locked to 1080p 60Hz. If you want to see your games in 4K on a big 4K TV, you're going to need the Retroid Pocket 6. When it comes to Wi-Fi, the Retroid Pocket 6 wins again with the newer Wi-Fi 7. One thing to note here is the Retroid Pocket G2 does have better, newer Bluetooth. I forgot to include that on this chart. I'm not trying to create some kind of Retroid Pocket 6 agenda, I just forgot. So it is worth noting that the Retroid Pocket G2, with its newer chipset, does have a newer Bluetooth chip. Although I've not noticed any issues with the current Bluetooth, but it's worth noting. Again, because this G2 Gen 2 chip is the newest of the devices, that means we also get a newer version of Android, Android 15. I've not noticed any real improvements of Android 15 over the older Android 13 in the Retroid Pocket 6 and Retroid Pocket 5, but there are potential improvements to be had there, so that's definitely a win for the Retroid Pocket G2 that we get a nice newer version of Android. The Retroid Pocket 5 has a 5000 mAh battery, as does the Retroid Pocket G2. The Retroid Pocket 6 is bumped up to a 6000 mAh battery. We will see later in the battery test that this doesn't make a huge difference, but it does look like a win on paper. Another thing to remember is that once again, because the Retroid Pocket G2 has a newer chipset, it could potentially be more efficient. So the difference between a 5000 mAh battery on a newer, more efficient chip compared to an older, less efficient chip with 6000 mAh battery might not really be too different. When it comes to weight, the Retroid Pocket 5 and the Retroid Pocket G2 are lighter at 280 grams, which for me is a win. The Retroid Pocket 6 is heavier at 320 grams, and when we take a look at the devices in a minute, it will become very clear why it's heavier. When it comes to price, the Retroid Pocket 5 is $199, the Retroid Pocket G2 is $219, and the Retroid Pocket 6 is $244, meaning there are only $45 between the three options. Now, with the Retroid Pocket 5 being the cheapest, I'm going to give that a win to the Retroid Pocket 5, but when we see what each one can do, the value proposition might change. So that's how they appear on paper, but what are they actually like in person? That's always what I care about a lot more. So let's first of all see how they feel in the hands. The Retroid Pocket 5 and the Retroid Pocket G2 are exactly the same on the outside. So let's just use the Retroid Pocket G2 as an example, but the Retroid Pocket 5 will be exactly the same. It is a nice little handheld. It has Pocket in the name, although putting this in a pocket is a bit of a stretch. You have the standard things like an SD card slot, a headphone jack, and the USB-C port, which is used both for charging and also for that USB video output as well. Standard volume and power buttons on the top, some ventilation on the back for the built-in fan, a D-pad up top with sticks at the bottom. These are Hall effect sticks, which feel very nice. Select and start buttons at the top, which I think is the best position for them. Android home and back buttons at the bottom, which is also pretty nice. Stereo front-firing speakers, which with a bit of EQ can sound pretty good. Clicky shoulder buttons, and very nice analog triggers. You'll also notice that nice curvature on the back as well, which helps for grip. And while it's not the biggest ergonomic bump, it is still nice to have, and I much prefer this over something flat like a Nintendo Switch. One thing Retroid is notorious for is their loud, clicky buttons. And as I start clicking away on the shoulder buttons, the D-pad, the start and select buttons, and especially these clacky face buttons, you can probably hear this over my voice, even though the microphone is right next to my mouth. This is one thing that has been improved on the Retroid Pocket 6. Here on the Retroid Pocket 6, we have these lovely face buttons which are much quieter. It is no comparison how much quieter they are. We also have that really cool 3D looking effect. I think this is what they call in double injection molded, or whatever those keyboard caps used to be called. We have, for the most part, the exact same other buttons. The same D-pad, the same back and home buttons, the same start and select buttons, the same clicky shoulder buttons, the same analog triggers, the same volume and power buttons on the top, the same SD card door, headphone jack, and USB-C output on the bottom, although like we mentioned earlier, this one supports 4K 60Hz output, which is lovely. But we do also have two extra buttons here. We have these two customizable back buttons, which you can choose to be anything you like. I'm not really a fan of these though, because they do jut out a little bit from the back. I don't find them the most comfortable to use, and I would personally just prefer they were not there and the back was smooth. But for people who like back buttons like this, I guess it's quite nice that they've been included. Once again, we have ventilation on the back for the inbuilt fan. And the main thing you'll notice that's different from the Retroid Pocket 5 and the Retroid Pocket G2 is that I have the analog stick up the top. Now, if you don't like this, you can buy the Retroid Pocket 6 with the D-pad up the top like this as well. The Retroid Pocket 6 is the only one that gives you the option of if you want the analog stick up top or the D-pad up top. If you go with the cheaper Retroid Pocket G2 or Retroid Pocket 5, you have to buy this configuration. There is no other option than D-pad up top, analog stick down the bottom. And as someone who prefers the analog stick up top, that does make the Retroid Pocket 6 quite a little bit nicer for me. One other thing that makes the Retroid Pocket 6 nicer for me is it's a lot thicker and girthier. If you compare here how it looks on the side, the grip is just much bigger and more ergonomic. As I said earlier, I do prefer the ergonomic bump here over something flat, but this is just far more substantial. And when you're using it and holding it, it feels much more comfortable. If you use the Retroid Pocket G2 or the Retroid Pocket 5, you might feel the need to invest in a grip. And there is an official grip available for all three of these. This is the official grip for the Retroid Pocket 5 or the Retroid Pocket G2, as they have the exact same chassis. You can use the same one on either. I bought this one for my Retroid Pocket 5 in the matching black color. As you can see, this does make things much more comfortable, especially if you're using that analog stick at the bottom. It's nice to have a little bit of separation between the base of your palm and the stick. So I do find this to be very comfortable with the grip, but that is an extra $15. That same grip can be used for the Retroid Pocket G2. You can, of course, get a matching yellow one if you like. So here is the Retroid Pocket G2 in the official grip. Once again, being that it's the exact same body as the Retroid Pocket 5, it's a lot more comfortable like this, at least in my opinion, and especially when using the lower stick. You can see it brings the actual overall girth of the control more in line with the Retroid Pocket 6, actually even a little bit larger, but much better than the stock Retroid Pocket 5, which now looks quite thin by comparison. We do also have an optional official grip for the Retroid Pocket 6 as well. Here I have the matching purple. This one actually has a textured finish on the back. And when placed into the matching grip here, once again, we get an even larger grip here. Again, larger than the Retroid Pocket G2 or Retroid Pocket 5 with their grip. An even bigger grip, which once again is super comfortable. And as I just mentioned, this grip has a textured finish because the Retroid Pocket 6 itself is all smooth on the back. That is the opposite of the Retroid Pocket 5 and the Retroid Pocket G2, which have textured bumps for better grip. So then Retroid decided for the grip accessory, it would be the opposite to that and be all smooth. So it is a little bit weird how you lose the textured grip if you get a grip for the Retroid Pocket 5 or G2, and you gain a textured grip if you buy the grip for the Retroid Pocket 6, just something a little bit strange about them. But this is something I wanted to bring up and something I think is important because, at least for me personally, I don't believe the Retroid Pocket 6 needs a grip. I actually find it more comfortable without the grip. I think without the grip, it is more than girthy enough and fits into my hands well. I find it comfortable without a grip. For $244, no grip, I'm happy just with this. Whereas if you were to buy the Retroid Pocket 5 or Retroid Pocket G2, I would suggest buying a grip. But the grip is $15. So it's suddenly not $244 versus $219. It's now $244 versus $234. It's now only a $10 difference. So that is something to consider when buying one of these handhelds. I think the straight out of the box experience of the Retroid Pocket 6 is more comfortable. But as with anything when it comes to comfort, this will be subjective and you might completely disagree with me. Let's do a very quick test of how loud and clicky the buttons are on these devices, because I did mention earlier that the Retroid Pocket 6 is much quieter, so we're going to use a volume meter here to show the difference. The Retroid Pocket G2 and the Retroid Pocket 5 are around 62 decibels. The Retroid Pocket 6 buttons are around 40 decibels, much quieter than the Retroid Pocket 5 and Retroid Pocket G2. We're now going to compare the speaker quality by listening to the Sonic the Hedgehog 2 game soundtrack, one of the best soundtracks ever made. I'm using the James DSP EQ app on the Retroid Pocket 5, which I made a video about before, and I'm also using a similar thing on the Retroid Pocket 6 with my own custom EQ curve, which I also made a video about recently. The screens on these are all beautiful. 1080p screens that are only 5.5 inches, so they're really sharp, they're extremely bright, and because they're OLED, they get extremely dark as well. So whether you're playing outside or at nighttime, it's going to look beautiful. The only difference is that the Retroid Pocket 6 doubles the refresh rate to 120 Hz. For most gaming situations, you wouldn't use more than 60 Hz anyway, but if you're playing PC games, streaming PC games, or want to do something like black frame insertion, then the 120 Hz will come in handy. But I will say that for the power of these devices, you're not really going to use the 120 Hz that often, at least in the case for most people, but it is still nice to have it. All of these screens are razor sharp, and if I was to put my little microscope on here so we can see nice and closely, which is definitely a high quality microscope and not something I ordered at 4 AM from AliExpress just because it was $2, you can really see the quality of all the individual pixels on the screen there. And also that grip texture that's on the Retroid Pocket G2 and the Retroid Pocket 5. The Retroid Pocket 6 being completely smooth, just with a slight gritty, sandy texture, which does slightly help the feel, but not as much as a real textured pattern. When it comes to performance, if all you're going to play on these devices are your old Game Boy games like this, maybe some PlayStation 1, perhaps a little bit of GameCube or Dreamcast at a push, then you'll really find getting any of these. Even the cheapest Retroid Pocket 5 is going to handle those fine. It can handle everything up to light Switch and PC gaming, so if you're really only looking for the retro games, you'll find with something like this, and maybe even something cheaper than this. But when you want to push a little bit more to the more difficult Switch and PC games, that's when you're going to see a difference. So we're going to test some of those now and see the differences you can get if you spend a little bit more money on a Retroid Pocket G2 or a Retroid Pocket 6. First of all, we're going to test some Switch games using the Eden emulator. I'm using the latest version of Eden at the time of release. I'm using the regular version for the Retroid Pocket G2 and the Retroid Pocket 6, but I'm using the legacy version on the Retroid Pocket 5, as that one is made for the older 865 chipset in here. On the Retroid Pocket 5, we're using the Mr. Purple T19 turnip driver, which I find works the best on this older chipset. And on the newer chipsets here, we're using the Mr. Purple T23 chipset. There is the T26 chipset which just released, but I find the T23 works pretty well for me. Once again, check out my website ryanretro.com and muready.com as well for compatibility lists across all different games. For today, we're trying to keep things nice and simple to just get an overall gist of how things are going to run. But there is one problem. The problem is my Retroid Pocket 6 is the upgraded 12GB of RAM version, which Retroid have since discontinued and is not available for sale. Now, I'm going to include it in this video just in case they make it available again, or if you maybe can get one second hand, or you have one lying around and you're curious how it performs. But to make a fair test and to show the Retroid Pocket 6 that you can buy today, we're going to bring in a substitute. We're going to bring in my Odin 2 Portal, which has the exact same internals as the 8GB Retroid Pocket 6. It has the same chip, the same 8GB of RAM, the same 128GB of storage, the same 1080p 120Hz screen. The only difference is it's a bit bigger. And this is the other alternative I alluded to in the beginning of the video, because right now it's on sale for $249. Only $50 more than the Retroid Pocket 5, only $5 more than the Retroid Pocket 6, and you get a nice, big, beautiful 7-inch screen instead of a 5.5-inch screen. So this could be another great way to go. So I'm going to add this into the comparison today. This should represent what the 8GB Retroid Pocket 6 will give you. And I'm going to set it up exactly the same as this Retroid Pocket 6, the T23 Mr. Purple turnip driver. Really lightweight Switch games like we have here, Everafter Falls, are not going to cause too much of an issue for any of the handhelds here. Starting with the cheapest, weakest one of the bunch here, the Retroid Pocket 5, it handles this game pretty well. You can see we're holding on to 60 frames per second pretty nicely. It's not going to tax the system too much. But I did notice with this game before, when I tried to connect 2 players and do some local co-op, it used to just crash. The Retroid Pocket 5 does crash when trying to do 2-player co-op on this game, whereas all of the other devices on the table can handle 2-player co-op fine. So something to think about is if you do want to play with others docked onto a TV, for retro games that's going to be fine. But for something like a Switch game, something a bit more modern that might be a little bit more demanding, you might run into issues. If you only want to play solo by yourself, these lightweight Switch games are going to run absolutely flawlessly. Here on the Retroid Pocket 5, I've played so many lightweight Switch games over the past year. The compatibility reports on my website are into the thousands at this point. It's a very capable light Switch machine. And if this can play it, it goes without saying that all of the other devices are going to play it really well too. If we step up to a far more difficult game to run on the Switch, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, this was right on the edge of playability for the Retroid Pocket 5. You may encounter milky water like this, which can be fixed with updates and different drivers. And through a combination of lowering resolution, changing drivers, I know people who have finished this game on the Retroid Pocket 5. It is playable, but it is on the edge of playability. If you just set things up as I have here without any real thought to perfecting the driver, you will get somewhere in the 20s for frame rate, around maybe 23 to 26. When you get into deeper action, you may lower down into the low 20s. In some areas, you can get a solid 30, but this is one that's going to need finding the right driver, which again is why fantastic websites like EmuReady are really great for the community, because you can find a nice driver, a nice combination of settings that will get you 30 frames per second. This one is just about playable in the Retroid Pocket 5, and with those good settings, you can get through the game on the Retroid Pocket 5. And once again, as the Retroid Pocket 5 is a bit weaker than the other devices on the table, that means that you can complete this game on all of these devices. With the Retroid Pocket G2, you can see here the frame rate is around 4 or 5 higher than the Retroid Pocket 5's was. It is occasionally dipping down once again, but we're getting much closer to a solid 30 here. And for the most part, we are actually at around 30. So once again, if we put more effort into perfecting the setup with a website that will help us, we will be able to get a pretty smooth experience here and be able to complete the game. The 12GB Retroid Pocket 6 is even more powerful, so once again it will be nicely playable here. And what I'm using to represent the 8GB Retroid Pocket 6, this Odin 2 Portal, once again we need to find a good driver, but we will be able to get a nice solid frame rate. There are so many resources out there for this chipset, you can really do very well with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. If we push things even more to the limits now of the really most demanding Nintendo Switch 1 games, we have The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. This is one that is, for the most part, just a little bit too difficult to run on the Retroid Pocket 5. I have tried to run it before, and you will see we're getting a pretty admirable 30 frames per second actually right now, but as you go through the game, you will get some big frame dips. It's a game that's quite hard to play on this chipset. If we jump off the edge here, which is going to be one of the things that really tank the frame rate, let's see how low the frame rate gets when we jump down. We're getting around 18, 16. We went down to around 16 frames per second. I have to say overall, this is actually doing much better than it usually does in my tests and making me quite hopeful. It definitely doesn't seem completely unplayable. It's a much better performance than you would get from a cheaper handheld like the Mangmi Air X or the Ayaneo Pocket S Mini or something like that. It's a frame rate that's not too terrible, but this is one that's going to be quite tricky to finish on the Retroid Pocket 5. If anyone has finished this game or got far into this game on the Retroid Pocket 5, please let me know, because that would be really interesting. But as you can see, the frame rate does tank quite a bit. Here on the more powerful Retroid Pocket G2, we have a frame rate that's hitting 30 a lot more often, but also dropping down into the mid-teens as well. Let's jump off the edge here. Before we got 16 frames per second on the Retroid Pocket 5, and we actually went down even to 14 here. The fan is also getting extremely loud on the G2, far more than anything else on this table. Using the same thin, small chassis as the Retroid Pocket 5, it does seem we may have some issues getting the most out of this quite powerful chip on such a dinky little body. In quieter areas, we are hanging on to 30 frames per second pretty well, but I get the feeling we're having some cooling issues here, preventing us from hitting that best performance consistently. But with the more powerful chip here, you are going to have a much better chance of running this well than the Retroid Pocket 5 in that same small, sleek, slim form factor. So I do think this is a pretty compelling and just very cool handheld. The Odin 2 Portal here, my representation of the 8GB Retroid Pocket 6, is hanging on to 30 frames per second pretty solidly. The overall frame rate in the hands feels a lot smoother, and while we are still tanking down to 14 or 18 frames per second, it feels noticeably smoother than the Retroid Pocket 5, very similar to the Retroid Pocket G2. And let's just check how the 12GB of RAM version of the Retroid Pocket 6 does. Let's see if that 12GB of RAM is helpful. So far, we are sticking to 30 frames per second a lot more consistently. Dropping down still does get us down to 14 or 17 frames per second, so it seems the extra performance doesn't really help that much there. And we are hanging on to around the mid-20s when it comes to the frame rate, dropping down to the low 20s as we're getting chased by this guy, and even dropping down into the teens occasionally. It's a game that's quite tricky to run on these devices. We will need to change some settings, but across the board, I'm actually not seeing too much of a difference here. The frame rate is pretty similar. But with tinkering, we just have more headroom and potential with the more powerful chips in the G2 and the 6. So if you were to find optimal settings for all of these, you would get better performances out of these ones just because they have more power. PC gaming will be a similar situation, but we could see more potential here as we have up to 120 Hz available on the Retroid Pocket 6 and the Odin 2 Portal, so we could play up to 120 frames per second and actually see a visual difference, compared to something like Switch gaming, which is hard capped to 60, and you won't see any more frames per second than 60 unless you use mods or uncap the speed limit and play in fast motion. So let's jump into Game Native now. I'll be making a video about this very soon because I'm really impressed with this app. And let's see how these devices do at PC emulation. If you're playing an old game like Jet Set Radio, which is a pretty old game, you're not going to see too much of a difference no matter what device you're playing on. It's pretty much capped to 30 frames per second anyway, and looks great even on the Retroid Pocket 5. Ouch. It's when you want to play a more demanding game, like Just Cause 3 for example, that you're going to see a much bigger difference between the devices. Here on the Retroid Pocket 5, I can't even get into the game. It says that it's logging in and loading, but even after a lot of waiting, it just eventually freezes, and I can't even get into the game. The fans go crazy, it gets hot. I just really don't think it can handle a game like Just Cause 3. We need to stick to lighter games. But here on my Retroid Pocket 6 with 12GB of RAM, it plays the game totally fine. I've got through the tutorial and I'm now just jumping and flying around the city for fun. We're getting around 50 frames per second, close to 60 most of the time. It runs really nicely. Now, the fan is extremely loud here. It sounds like a jet engine is taking off right in my face, but it runs smoothly compared to the Retroid Pocket 5, where we can't even get into the game. This is where you see the biggest difference between the generations of devices in these more demanding Windows games. When using devices with 8GB of RAM, like this 8GB Odin 2 Portal, we do get a low memory warning, which we don't get with our 12GB of RAM version. Game Native doesn't seem to want to sync my Steam save file, which is a little bit annoying, so we're back in the tutorial here. As you can see, we are lagging out quite a bit, but we did lag out quite a bit the same way with the 12 gigabytes of RAM RP6 because you can see there's a lot going on in this intro. When we get through the tutorial out into the open world, things do run a lot better. And the performance here is actually okay, I would say. 24 frames per second in a really busy area, getting shot at from all directions. We're actually doing okay. When we get out into the open world, I'm sure we'll get closer to at least 30 frames per second, and hopefully even higher. Once again, with the Retroid Pocket G2, we got that warning about using 8 gigabytes of RAM, and here, once again, it has forgotten my save file. So we're back in that tutorial, but at least now we can compare it to how the 8 gigabytes of RAM Retroid Pocket 6 or Odin 2 Portal did. And once again, we're getting around 20 frames per second. It's basically the exact same thing. The chip in the Retroid Pocket G2 and the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chip are just so similar that it almost feels pointless that they even released a different chip. They're just so incredibly similar. It really is like they've taken the chip from the Odin 2 line and put it into a Retroid Pocket 5, which is actually pretty cool. So just like the Odin 2 Portal or the 8GB Retroid Pocket 6, we're running this okay. Not as well as the 12GB Retroid Pocket 6 did, but again, we are unfortunately in a different part of the game. But I have tested lots of games over the past few weeks before making this video, and that has been my observation, that 12 gigabytes does make a difference in these more demanding games, but for the most part, you should be fine with 8 gigabytes of RAM. You'll be able to play most light and medium titles fine. The Retroid Pocket dual screen can also be used with any of these devices. The Retroid Pocket 5 and G2 have the USB-C port in the middle, so it's nice and convenient to use. The Retroid Pocket 6, unfortunately, has the USB-C port slightly off-center and to the left-hand side, but you can still make it work with a little bit of wiggling. Some people have also come up with some clever adapters online, but it does work, everything functions perfectly. And I did intend to show some 3DS and DS shootouts in this video, but they just all played everything that I tested completely fine. I'll put some battery statistics up on the screen now. You can see that also with the battery life, everything was very similar. Interestingly, the Retroid Pocket G2 absolutely crushed the 3DS test, but then came up a little bit short in the Switch gaming test. But all of them are really close, to the point that I don't think you can really split them too much when it comes to battery life. The Retroid Pocket 6 has a bigger battery, the Retroid Pocket G2 has a more efficient chip, and the Retroid Pocket 5 is just pushing less power, so they all work out pretty similarly in the end. So which one of these should you buy? If your hard limit is $200 and you will not go above $200, the Retroid Pocket 5 is still a fantastic handheld. There is a wealth of information out there about it, it's held up really well this past year, it can still play everything right up to light and even medium Switch games and light PC games. Everything below that is a breeze. It feels pretty comfortable, it's nice and thin and sleek, and it's just a great handheld overall that I love. It also kickstarted this channel, so it has a special place in my heart forever. The Retroid Pocket G2 is also pretty cool. It has that same build quality of the Retroid Pocket 5, but with more power, but I do have to say I think it's now overshadowed by the Retroid Pocket 6, and this is the one that is a bit hard to recommend now that the Retroid Pocket 6 has released. Because this is only $25 more than the Retroid Pocket G2. And if you were to get the grip for the Retroid Pocket G2, which I'd recommend, this is only $10 more than the Retroid Pocket G2. And for that $10 to $25 extra dollars, you go from a 60Hz screen to a 120Hz screen. You go from 1080p output to 4K output. You get the option to change the analog stick and D-pad positions if you want to. You get a thicker, girthier, more comfortable grip on the device. You get better face buttons that don't have that horrible click-clack sound. They're nice and quiet. I think those things are more than worth $10 or $25. Those are fantastic upgrades. When it comes to performance, they're pretty neck and neck. You do get that wealth of information from the 8 Gen 2 chip, and apps like Game Native are starting to implement automatic game profiles for people using the same chip. So using the same chip as AYN Thor users, Odin 2 users is quite beneficial. But overall, they are pretty neck and neck when it comes to performance. I wouldn't recommend one over the other in terms of performance, but I do think you get more than enough here to justify the extra $10 to $25 that I would say the Retroid Pocket 6 is my go-to recommendation out of these 3. But we do also have to address the elephant in the room, which is AYN currently have the Odin 2 Portal on sale for $249, only $5 more than the Retroid Pocket 6. It has exactly the same specs, but a bigger 7-inch screen, a bigger handheld in general that a lot of people like, so it has to be considered as well. So if you like a bigger handheld, check that out before it goes off sale. Although I do have a feeling the sale will stick. One last thing to mention though is it is almost a necessity to buy the grip with the Odin 2 Portal. While it is quite comfortable without one, the grip just elevates it to the next level. Many people say that it is the perfect handheld with a grip, but that will of course add another $15 again. So then you are up to $264. So do bear that in mind, but it's definitely worth mentioning the Odin 2 Portal here when thinking about these 3 Retroid options. If I only could pick one, I would recommend the Retroid Pocket 6 because I prefer a smaller handheld and I find it very comfortable even without a grip. For these other 3, I would likely use a grip at least sometimes, but for the Retroid Pocket 6, I never feel the need for a grip, and I find it to be a great device overall. The only reason I could think to recommend the Retroid Pocket G2 right now is for the color, which sounds ridiculous, but it's my favorite looking device on the table here. In the guitar playing community, we have this thing where we recommend beginners and newbies to get a guitar that looks good rather than one that sounds good. Because when you're first starting out playing guitar, it's not going to sound good no matter what you do. So the most important thing is you actually get a guitar that looks good, because then you want to pick it up and play it, and that will make you practice, make you fall in love with it, and make you get better, and then you can buy a better guitar later. So similarly with these handhelds, if you have a handheld you love the look of, you might be more inclined to pick it up and play it more often. If you're someone chasing the absolute best performance, best bang for the buck, I don't recommend the Retroid Pocket G2. I recommend spending a bit more and getting the Retroid Pocket 6 or the Odin 2 Portal. But if you're more casual and you don't really care about the absolute best bang for the buck, and you just want something fun to play sometimes, the Retroid Pocket G2 is also a good option because it is really good and I think it looks beautiful. So that's something you might think is ridiculous, but I just wanted to put that out there because there is something to be said about getting a handheld you think looks nice. But once again, overall, my main recommendation would be the Retroid Pocket 6, the Odin 2 Portal if it's still on sale and you want something bigger, and I'd only recommend the Retroid Pocket 5 if you can get one on sale for cheap or you just can't spend more than $200, maybe your parents say $200 is your limit. And the Retroid Pocket G2, I really wouldn't recommend it unless you just love the look of it. And if you have a Retroid Pocket G2, don't feel disheartened by that because it's still a great handheld. I did a whole review about it on my website where I recommended it and said it's great, and it's still great. I really don't think you can go wrong with any of these. So let me know in the comments what you think. Do you have any of these? Which ones would you recommend? And I'll look forward to talking to you down there. Thank you so much for watching this video today, and I'm sure it won't be long before I'm saying hello again.